Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, Mysterious Voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out-of-the-ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, it is the beginning of November, so I don't want to talk about a specific book that I read, but rather I want to do the usual wrap-up and TBR, and just talk about what I read and what I plan to read in November, especially as we get near the end of the year. It was some fun horror in October, although I do feel that some of the horror didn't live up to what I had read last year. Just some disappointing things that if they had gone a little bit further or done something else, they might have been truly great. But I did watch some cool movies besides The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I talked about with Lucas from Strike the Sun MD. I also watched The Bride of Frankenstein for the first time, which I thought was funny and very interesting. Certainly more enjoyable than the classic Frankenstein movie, which probably makes me a heretic in horror circles. But I felt like the classic Frankenstein deviates too much from the original source material and is more cheesy than anything else. But the Bride of Frankenstein is also cheesy, but it realizes there is no source material for it to follow up on anymore, and so it just decides to be as wacky as possible, which I enjoyed. And then I watched a lot of other cool movies as well. And for November, I have a number of interesting books planned. We are nearing the end of the year, and so I'll have my wrap-up and TBR prepared for December, of course. But maybe I'm going to find something interesting in November or December that might find its way on the list. Certainly a lot of interesting books to think about and a lot of hard choices to make as, I usually do top 10 books, but there's way more than 10 that kind of fits the bill this year. But we'll see what ends up on the list as we get into December. So without further ado, let's do the wrap-up and TBR, and we'll move on from there. So what did I read in October in terms of books? I read a number of comic books and regular novels and whatnot. I read A Glacial Period, which was a book about aliens discovering art from years past on Earth. I thought it was mostly boring. It didn't really seem to do anything beyond say, haha, see how zany or strange the art of yesteryear was. And, other things have done that, so I didn't enjoy it too much. And then I also read a book called Hidden. It was a graphic novel about the Holocaust, similar to what Mouse did, but it wasn't as in-depth as Mouse was, but it was still pretty good. I also read Berserk Volume 6, which I thought was rad. The entire Berserk series has been great, and I look forward to seeing what else Kentaro Miura does as the series goes on. And then I also read Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas, which I thought was bad. It had a very interesting kind of type of vampire element to it because it was based on Mexican legends and whatnot, and so their vampires are different from American vampires or European vampires. So that should have been very interesting, but it was bogged down by a weird romance. Like Isabel Cañas wanted to talk about love and the weird relationships like that rather than focus on the vampires, and it just comes off as tonally weird type of story, and so not really worth checking out. I also read The Sleep Room, which I thought was okay. I thought it had a lot of potential. It was very spooky and it was a great setup, but the execution was wonky. Spoiler alert for the story, but the ending is essentially that the author is saying that this might all be taking place in a dream, that the the psychologist in the story might actually be one of the patients, and he's dreaming everything that's happening, and it's left sort of ambiguous, which could drive a person mad and whatnot. But then the author just comes out and says that exact thing that's happening. They kind of spell it out, which I feel is an insult to the readers and kind of damages the scariness of the ambiguity. So unfortunately, pretty bad there. And then I also read Friends with Boys by Faith Erin Hicks, not very much in line with the Spooktober theme, although it did have a ghost in it, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was pretty good, a fun graphic novel all around, but it didn't have a lot of meat on it for me to discuss. There wasn't a lot of angles for me to attack there. I also read Captain America: Winter Soldier by Ed Brubaker. I thought it was okay. It had a lot of potential, but it kind of misses that, and it also fails to examine the fascinating questions that it poses. Because, again, spoilers, Bucky turns out to be the Winter Soldier, and Captain America laments that the Russians brainwashed him into becoming this super assassin. And what the comic fails to actually address is that the Americans were doing the same thing. Brubaker brings it up, but never really, he hurries beyond that. He never really cares to examine that the Americans were doing the exact same thing to this teenager, turning him into a cold-blooded killer in order to help the war effort. And I talked about that when I talked about my review for the story, but it just bothers me that that Brubaker could bring up a very fascinating point, one that, actually brings up a lot of questions about comics in general, and even Captain America. But because of that, maybe that's why they didn't want to explore it further, because it would just completely dismantle whether or not you can actually root for Captain America. But you can't just bring up that point and then just move beyond it. It's like opening up Pandora's box. It raises a lot of questions that you can't just hide from then on. I also read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I thought it was just okay. A very interesting setup and great writing on Shirley Jackson's part, but I feel like the characters never really connect the dots between what's going on in the house and the characters at large, their backgrounds and whatnot. I feel like more work could have been done in that area, and so it ends up just kind of landing too softly for me to really be that interested in. So a lot of missed potential there as well. And then I also read Dead Sea by Tim Curran, which was fun. I thought it was a very interesting book about being lost at sea and the terrors and cosmic horror and all of that. I think Tim Curran does a great job at writing, but it also feels repetitive in a lot of ways. And the biggest problem is that it feels overlong, which the story kind of overstays its welcome and drags on at certain points. And I feel like 100 or 200 pages shorter and more focused on something specific rather than being a catalog of horrors, a sort of on-rails experience of horrors, it could have been even better in my opinion. I also watched The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, as I mentioned before. It was a German expressionist movie from the 1920s, which I watched with Lucas from Strike the Sun MD. We both thought it was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. Super spooky, and I love the atmosphere and the twist at the end, which it's a 100-year story at this point, so it's not that big of a twist, or not that big of a spoiler for me to say there was a twist. I definitely recommend that you check it out, even outside the month of October. It would be an interesting watch for sure, and it's something that you could find on YouTube pretty easily. I also read a number of short stories for Junji-tober, which was a month where I talked about Junji Ito short stories, of course. This included Tombs, Slug Girl, The Window Next Door, The Strange Tale of the Tunnel, and Floaters. All of them great. I think my favorite is probably Floaters. And I do have to give a shout out to my friend Luna, who is in the Around the Weird Discord, among other Discords that we share in common. She's the one. They are the one who suggested that I check out Junji Ito, and I have to say it's a very good recommendation. I absolutely love his writing, and I love how he kind of leans on Poe and other masters of horror to really tell a terrifying story. Luna mentioned that Junji Ito was a master of the page turn, where you turn the page and you see something truly awful and horrifying, and indeed that is what he is. I I have to give Ito credit for that. So I'm very much looking forward to checking out Ito down the road. But I love what I found in Junji-tober. I also read a number of poems for the month of October that were all spooky themed in some capacity. I recommend that you go check out my Poetry Thursday sort of playlist to find out more about those videos. But what do I plan to read in November? Well, in terms of November, in terms of books, or actually in terms of movies first, I do plan to watch another movie with Lucas from Strike the Sun MD, as I keep saying. I forget what the name of the movie is, but I do believe it's Chinese or Hong Kong cinema, so I'm very much looking forward to that. In terms of books, I do plan to read a book that I'm reading now is actually My Sister the Serial Killer by a Nigerian author whose name I'll put up there because I forgot about it. It seems to be interesting so far, but I can't wait to see what more it brings. I also plan on reading Notes of a Dirty Old Man by Charles Bukowski, which I picked up from a bookstore in San Francisco. I love reading Bukowski. I love Bukowski's poetry, but I haven't really read some of his other writings. So I look forward to seeing what that brings. I'll read the next volume of Berserk and Spy X Family, which I found from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. And then the other library reads that I find this month. The book club read, which I don't think Bevan has told me yet as I'm making this video, so be on the lookout for that. And then I also want to get to Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, which I've had for a while. It's probably the last bookstore read that I've yet to read from my last visit in like June or July or something like that. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it because Sanderson is a compelling writer at times, but in those empty spaces where he's just droning on and on and on at times about things that are just extraneous to the plot, it feels really boring. It feels like sometimes he's losing his direction. The books are tonally jarring at times, where sometimes characters are like, this is essential that we fix this problem, and then the characters go on a date or something like that, and it's like, do you really have time for this? And I really want to drop Sanderson because his books are 1,200 pages long, and like, who has the time for that, especially when an author just feels like they're meandering all the time. But at the same time, I realize I have a friend who would tell me, you're not giving Sanderson a chance. And I feel like I have given him a chance, but he hasn't really proved himself. Maybe that's heretical to the people who love Sanderson out there, but I just can't seem to get into his stories. And so I think Oathbringer will be that last effort. If I'm not sold on Sanderson by the end of this book, I'm just not reading him anymore. That might be like a weird way or a dumb way to cut off a writer or something like that. But if at a certain point, if they haven't appealed to you, then reading them isn't really going to make them any better. Of course, I say that knowing that I've been reading Meg Cabot's work and complaining about it for the past 2 or so years. So, I'm part of the problem, I guess. I also have a number of short stories that I have planned, including a collection that I found at my local library called Gordo, and a short story from the author Charles Chestnut, who is an African-American author from yesteryear. Should be interesting. And then a number of other short stories as well. And then I have a number of poems planned for the month of November. I do want to get to a Gazan author to talk about the Gazan experience, especially in light of everything that has happened between Gaza and Israel with the Israeli IDF's attack of Gaza and the murdering of innocent civilians, which a lot of people might say, well, if you're talking about a Gazan poet, you might as well talk about a Jewish poet or an Israeli poet. And I think I've done that on this channel already. So, go find that in my Poetry Thursday collection. But I do think it's important to talk about Gazan writers and the oppression in Gaza and Palestine and all of those things. Because if you don't say something, then it feels like you're complicit in a way, like you're not the one holding the gun and allowing all this to happen, but somebody has to speak for those who don't really have a voice at this time. Although, again, it does also feel like I'm another white person out there talking about this, but I guess you need as many people as possible talking about it. Because again, if nobody talks about it, people get away with horrible actions and war and and genocide and whatnot. So look forward to those poems. Hopefully it's not too much of a letdown in the wake of current events. Anyway, that was my wrap up for October and my TBR for November. If you have any suggestions or you want to comment on something I read in October, do so below. I would love to have a discussion with you about this, especially if you have any recommendations for books that you think I might be interested in. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this channel if they don't already know. What else? Yeah. Join the Discord too. There's a link in the description if you want to talk about books, movies, or other such things. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and November-y travels. Farewell.